This week concludes our discussion of the hamstrings. We will wrap up today by focusing on ways we can prepare our bodies for a peak pose. Let's say you are done with your warm-up, you've stretched the spine in all the directions, done a twist, breath work, and woken up the main joints. If you are focusing your class on the hips, let's say, we would want to make sure we warmed up the hips, of course, but also the calves. The calves and hamstrings have a connection that is sometimes surprising in its strength. The calves and shin muscles also have a connection. So when we think about the hips, we need to think of more than the hips. And this is true of every type of class, no matter the focus. If we're working towards frog pose, let's say, as a peak pose, we don't just jump in. We need to begin engaging the gluteus medius and minimus and TFL because later on, those muscles are going to be helping us a lot in our peak pose in the form of hip abduction and stabilization when the hips are in lateral rotation in frog pose. The hip adductors and the hamstrings, particularly semimembranosus, the most medial and deepest hamstring, muscle works right alongside those hip adductors, and these must be considered in the warm-up and cool-down, along with the muscles that stabilize them, which is their opposing muscle group, or the quads and the abductors, right? That glute, min, med, TFL. The hip adductors need to be prepared for this pose, and it may take more than one session to really achieve this goal. We also can modify our peak pose, right? We want to have those modifications ready. Even staff pose helps us to activate the adductors because when we're intentional with the muscles we engage, we pull the thighs together in this posture. Another nice pose to help prepare the body for frog might be seated knee to head pose. In this pose, we're in both knee extension on one side but flexion on the other, as well as incorporating the upper body. It lengthens the hip adductors and hamstrings simultaneously, while the bent leg is engaging the hamstrings to bend the knee, as well as shortening the lateral rotators of the hip. Over the course of the class, we then increase the amount of stretch placed on the adductors in preparation for the peak pose. We could include a variation on reclined extended hand to big toe pose and focus on lengthening the hip adductors in addition to the hamstrings and calves. The upper body must also be considered for frog pose in particular. You may want to warm up the chest, the rhomboids in between the shoulder blades, the rotator cuff, the serratus anterior, just to name a few muscles. And I always find making sure the neck has been taken into consideration an important factor because the spine is long, and its position in the head and pelvis play a role in what ends up where. The hip adductors are the focus of a large stretch in frog pose, just one of the muscles that's in a stretch, and without proper preparation, this may cause quite a bit of discomfort. It's important to prepare your body for what is coming so you can work with it rather than against it. But it's also important to include counter poses throughout so that one side is not overstretched at the end of class. We never want to try to force our bodies into positions they are not ready for. With proper warm-up, correct alignment, preparation, and patience, eventually we might just get there.